The time now, 5 minutes after 6. Barometer reading 7.8, expected to fall. Temperature is exactly at the sound of the gong. At the sound of the gong, the exact time is 12 after the hour. And now, the Wall Street Stock Market Report.
Dow Jones average 18.18, closing yesterday at 23.28, down 2 points. American Cyanamide 32 off 2, IBM 39.5, down.
Okay, so you said the first play was.
I don't like to talk in front of a camera.
It was called Mother.
It was called Mother. You didn't remember. I remembered, and then we saw it. You saw the program.
Yeah, I don't know what that.
And I remember the in the middle of the stage there was a big bed, and in the big bed there was an actress sitting, and she was the mother.
Really?
Yeah, and I think she was there giving orders or something. She never gets out of bed.
That was the play.
Yeah.
I hope you didn't destroy it.
Huh?
I hope you didn't destroy it. Could have won a Pulitzer today. I thought I wrote a play about someone sitting at the table and he was doing a soup as I dipped my soup from me, and then someone jumped off the. No, that wasn't it.
Jumps off
that building and he sees the person fall on the window. No, that wasn't the play.
No.
No. Huh.
Oh.
I must have wrote that.
These were one acts.
I must have written that about my mother then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently.
Because you wrote it there on the spur of the moment.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. It's not that you had it there, because we said, I said I'm opening a theater and this, and then Ed Treichler had already written for theater. I had a few one acts, and so you wrote that just for the opening of the inner theater.
I wonder if I still have it.
I don't have it. No. You know what I have that I had mentioned to you, Ben, is I have a tape that taped. I remember the play that was taped. The sound only was The Confused Smiths, and was one of the 3 plays of opening night The Confused Smiths. Did you notice?
You mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, but where it said the trilogy was one of the plays of The Confused Smiths?
Yes, that was one of the 3.
So I wonder if the other plays were taped also.
Well, tell me about the inner theater when it started.
Well, I found a loft on the street level. It could have been like a storage or something, and then made it into a theater. And every day I walked. My house was like 3 blocks away, and every day.
Where was it?
It was Third Avenue, 3rd Street and Bowery, and my apartment was 9th Street and 3rd Avenue. And every day I'd walk to the theater, and on my way I would find a chair, and that's the way I furnished the theater. I found 99 in like a month. I found 99 chairs in the street.
I remember you showing me a light that you had got off the street, and you proudly said, and I showed this to an antique friend and said this was worth $75.
No, it was worth $100.
$100. Well,
yeah, but I found it in the street, and I took it across the street to an antique store. It was in the garbage, and the guy said, "Oh, it was a copper standing like I have over there," and he said, "It could be a Tiffany," and he said, "But it's not signed." But to be honest, is sometimes Tiffany didn't sign all his work. So all I can give you is $100. But being honest, it could be a Tiffany. If it's a Tiffany, then it's worth a few $1,000s. But since it's not signed, I can only give you $100.
Yeah, so this is the world in which your theater existed.
Yeah,
in New
finding
York.
Everything
right.
in the street.
And at that time, you weren't working at Max's Kansas City, or not?
At the time, when I had the theater, I was a bartender at Max's Kansas, the owner, but the restaurant was called something else on Park Avenue. So I don't know if it, no, because working, John knows him for Charles. In the Christmas, he was a best friend of my brothers. They're still in contact, Charles and my brother. They're always writing to each other.
You want to give your brother's name?
John.
Right.
John. And
Lives in Paris.
what he did is, at Christmas, he would make me manager of his store. Because I asked him to. So I'd work like so at Christmas it was the best time, and then like in 3 months, I could make like $5,000. So at the time it was, my rent's $90. So
What was his store? What did he do? Sell gold bars?
No, bowl and board. It's
Bowl and board. No wonder. So you worked there too?
I worked there too. It was the first job I ever had where I wasn't a professional. They'd go in there and there'd be a big pile of skins or fur coats, and somebody'd say, "Okay, now move all those skins over to that spot," and then they'd say, "Okay, now move them over to this spot," and then they'd say, "Okay, it's time for lunch," and then after lunch you come back and say, "Okay, now you get to move
them back again,"
and then now you can take the fur coats into the warehouse, and that was how the days went. That was how the days went.
You were a loader.
The theater was in St. Mark's Place, was that what it was?
The theater?
Yeah.
No, Bowery.
Oh, in the Bowery.
Bowery, which would be the equivalent of 3rd Avenue.
Yeah.
But 3rd Avenue becomes the Bowery. So it's the Bowery and 3rd Street.
And when you opened, was John Prince there?
Yeah, the first production.
Our John Prince, who's sitting right over here.
Yeah, the first production was John's, Ed Treitler's, and my own.
Okay, so tell me about Ed Treitler. He's no longer with us.
Yeah. So him I had met maybe like 5 years before. So it had been some time that I had known him. And I had introduced him to his wife.
Oh, you introduced him to her?
Huh?
You introduced them?
Yeah.
How did you know her?
Because through Charles. And
who was Charles? Do you have a last name?
Charles Fitzgerald, and he was my brother's best friend, or is my brother's best friend.
How interesting.
So when I got to New York, I went to his house, his apartment, and I stayed there a few days until we went skiing. I didn't know how to ski. I broke an ankle. So I stayed the next 6 weeks in his apartment.
The man who came to dinner.
What?
The man who came to dinner. A guy breaks his leg.
But
he's there for
he came to dinner, but he worked for his. At the time Charles was teaching English at the New School, and he had a storefront that he was going to start selling bowls and boards. So I had nothing to do because I had a broken ankle. So I sat in the store for 6 weeks, and at the beginning there was maybe 100 bowls and 100 boards. I had nothing to do, so the first week I sold like 40. He was out teaching, and I sold like $40. Then at the end I sold like $150. So, but I started his store.
Really?
Yeah. And
How come you're not a millionaire like him then?
He wanted me to. He said, "You want to be partners?" And I wasn't interested. But I was partner with him because he started buying buildings on St. Mark's Place, and one of the buildings had we were going to open a restaurant, and the idea is Jim Rose, that had a bookstore on St. Mark's Place, and myself would run the place, and then Charles he'd be the owner of the building, and so we didn't have to pay rents, air conditioning he would pay for, and but the other guy and I would run it. And finally, Charles was offering up to $50,000 to get a liquor license, and wasn't able to get it. So we opened the restaurant for one day and then closed.
I remember going into
New York.
What's that?
New York, New York.
Yeah.
I
It's a hell of
remember
a
going
town.
into the basement of one of that building or one of his buildings, and it was seeing a building that was built probably in the 1830s or 40s or 50s, and brick and old wood and wires grafted, plumbing grafted on, and I asked whoever I was with down there, we were doing something, how you got permits to do anything, because this is not like Los Angeles at all. I mean, this is like a really dangerous place to be in, and this person said, well, you pay them off. You don't, they come around, they tell you what's wrong, and depending on how long that list is, that's how much of a bribe you have to pay, And it was really a different experience for me. But I remember that you introduced me, one of the first people you introduced me to was Ed and his wife. And
Roz.
Yeah, that was a...
So tell me about them, since they are no longer with us. In fact, you should mention to me that, you did mention to me that one of the reasons why we did this is because you've had these very interesting experiences, a long one with John over here, and when people die, they're gone forever. You can't, bring back their memory and so on. So tell me a little bit about what you both remember about Ed Treichler, who died recently, right?
Yeah, in June of this year, June, July.
Well, of course, I didn't have a lot to do with that. Just that short time in New York and once in Mexico. And then he came once to visit me in Northern California. But I remember the first time his apartment. I remember it had shiny hardwood floors, and I walked in and everybody was sitting on the floor. And they were something to do with poetry, and I remember seeing Roz, his wife, for the first time, thinking how stunningly good looking she was. And then there was, I of course, I was a West Coast person, completely out of my element, so I kept my mouth shut. While these various people, I guess the definition of erudite, started in reciting this bit of poetry and that bit of poetry, and this one person next to me was trying to make a point, and he started out with the poem, and Ed suddenly interrupted this person and finished the poem with 3 or 4 lines, and then he said to the person, he said that was one of the stupidest, most superficial things I ever heard, and if you haven't anything to say other than to memorize a line or two of poetry, you don't belong here. And the person didn't know what to say.
But
and they got up and they walked out, and that was my introduction to intellectual New York. Here's what I think happened. We were ready to go. I had written the play. We were ready to go within a matter of 3 or 4 or 5 days of opening night, and I left town.
Oh, really?
I think I left town just before opening night, and everybody was pretty unhappy about that. But once I decided that I was done with New York, I left.
So you went there for opening night?
I don't think I was.
And his play opened there.
Well, because what happens on opening night is, I remember Ed Treichler was there, and the play, everybody, the end of the third play, and they're very good, and Ed Treichler runs to the hospital. His daughter was just born.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
On opening night, his daughter was born. So that's the last I saw of him. So on one day, you disappeared and Treichler disappeared. I mean, not disappeared, but I just stopped seeing you guys.
I mean, he didn't come back to the theater?
No.
Really? You were all by yourself?
No.
So I mean, after that, you were a director, producer, writer, and everything?
And then that's when, I don't know how later, because I had help, all the people, but then the one that became full-time manager was William Powell.
Not the William Powell.
The author,
actor.
not the author of the book.
The Anarchist Cookbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
he was
who
very
were the
young.
actors and actresses?
What's that?
Who were the actors and
We
actresses?
found them all over the place.
Yeah, because they were
About
plethora.
a dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody was an actor and actress.
Yeah.
That was one thing that I knew I wasn't.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Oh well.
That was a no. I think I am.
Oh, I didn't know you had. I thought you
Yeah.
were there on opening night or something.
Yeah.
And when was the last time you saw Ed Treitler together, the two of you? All three of you were together.
I would say in Puerto Vallarta,
In Puerto Vallarta.
maybe 10 years ago,
Oh, I think longer than that.
longer than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was going to be another time after that, and I was poised to come, and I backed out at the last second for whatever reason. But we were there for 3 or 4 days. How many times did you go there?
How many times to Puerto Vallarta?
Yeah, to see him.
Over the years, quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. I remember you would always go and you would always test out his Spanish the first day to see if it was any better or good. Yeah.
And why did Ed go to Mexico in the first place?
What I say is he was a like Russian Jew from New York. Well, his parents were or something, and then this might be like 20 years ago, or when he, like 15 years before he died, or 15 years ago, in Mexico he discovered, and he became a Mexican in spirit, and then he learned the language, and so all of a sudden, from being a Jew in New York, he became a Mexican in Puerto Vallarta.
And what did he do down there?
He worked for a newspaper. I think it was the Guadalajara newspaper. And was an art critic. In the States, in Massachusetts, he had a newspaper, and the newspaper was one of those health food newspapers that has horoscopes, and then in Puerto Vallarta also he had a service of couples that wanted to get married again. He would arrange it. And he said, whatever you want. You want 20 white horses on the beach with an orchestra playing symphony. If you pay for it, I'll arrange it for you. Or do you want a little this on the beach on the sunset, and then you tell me what you want me to say, and so if you pay for it, I'll arrange any kind of wedding you want.
Yeah, he seemed. I spent one day with him down there. He seemed to be just like you say, had become a Mexican. He showed me how he'd go to the market and he'd get some fruits and he'd say hello to people, and he was in no hurry, and he would stop, and there was a place that sold the masks, and he liked to go in there, and then his apartment was on the other side of the bridge, and he would. And it was very old world Mexico, his apartment. But I think the problem was, I think he kept getting. I don't think he ever had much of an income, and I think he was always being squeezed for money.
Yeah, no, but he since he spent so little when he lived, his only luxury is once a year he'd go for like a month to visit his daughter.
What happened to Roz?
She married a philosopher. Like Harvard professor or something, and they're still. Ed told me that the last weeks of his life is that his daughter he lived like a mile away from her, and that she was really nice and took care of him, and so she's still there. I was never in contact with her, so.
I visited them. I forgot I visited them in upstate New York. I would say a few years after they left New York City, they bought it was a synagogue. I think.
Synagogue. Yeah.
They bought a synagogue, and I remember they were all living there, including their very eccentric friend Bill, who's still alive, living with the family. I think he actually kind of became more a father to his daughter than he was, And I remember this thing. Bill was such an eccentric person. He'd been a printer in New York, And this synagogue was so big and drafty, and it got heated. He had put a potbelly, it had a potbelly stove at one end, and he had created a long chimney pipe that ran the entire internal length of this place. And I
That was his heating system.
yeah, that didn't last too long. And
So-
I think she died shortly thereafter. I don't.
She remarried. They got divorced.
Oh, she did. Oh, I
She
didn't know
remarried,
that.
and then they were living in Hawaii.
And what part did Roz play in the inner theater?
Nothing, zero.
Really? Okay.
She was having a baby in the hospital when
Mm.
on opening night. So
Tell me about the purpose of the inner theater. Why did you create it in the first place? I mean, it just happened, but then it had to have some concept. It seems like you did have some concepts about what you wanted to do with theater.
well, the thing, basically, since I wanted it for my theater. You know, I couldn't put on a play. I didn't have that many plays that I could put on a play every month. So we put on other people's playing. But basically, and then.
So you wanted to be Bertolt Brecht.
Huh?
You wanted to be Bertolt Brecht.
Actually, we had one of the actresses knew, I forget her name, she's an actress that was a friend of Brecht and had some unedited poems. And so she lent them to the inner theater, and we made a theatrical evening of that.
You had some very interesting experience. I remember there was one with the Little Prince that evolved into something very interesting.
Yeah, because that was directed by my girlfriend Delia, and basically we put it on. I helped her do an adaptation, a theatrical adaptation of the novel.
How long did the inner theater last?
I think at that location a year and a half, and after that, William Powell got married, wrote the book, and then went to Canada or something, or Alaska to find gold, and then Richard Castillo took over the inner theater and then tried to get some grants and things like that.
I wanted to ask you about your dirty night. You had an obscene night or something like that?
A dirty evening.
Dirty evening. Yeah, what was that like?
At one time when to take a break, we rented the theater to a theater group. So it's okay, we need it from this day to this day for a month. And so we'd make a little money, we'd be able to pay the rent, and we could rest. So we make a deal with a theater group. They say, okay. So we're starting to relax, and then they quit. They said, no, we're not going to pay you. Oh shoot, we have to. What shall we do? I don't know. Do you have a play right now? And we came up with the idea of a dirty evening, and the idea was us writers that were there, each one to choose from universal literature like Henry Miller, Boccaccio, different, that are known for their pornographic, erotic, dirty.
Desaad.
Huh?
Desaad.
Yeah. And so we each picked something. I can't remember what I did. It could have been Henry Miller, because I was reading a lot of Henry Miller at the time. I remember Richard Castillo directed Boccaccio, and that was pretty dirty what he did with it. But that was the purpose of.
You also got sued for the Student Prince, I think.
Yeah.
How did that turn out?
Because we didn't have basically what we did, it was opening on weekends, Saturday and Sunday mornings, children free, and adults $3 or $5, And then we received a notice of cease and desist from Paramount Studios, and the attorney showed up, and I said, what? We're gonna sue you, and sue me? You won't get anything. We don't have any money. Okay, come to my apartment and take my typewriter. That's the most expensive thing I have. And then finally we decided to go to court and represent ourselves. and then the Paramount attorney was there, and when it was our turn, we go up and, "Oh, Your Honor," and then, what are these guys? I don't understand. They're talking. What are they? Because we weren't talking legalese, you know.
Yeah.
So the Paramount attorney said, "Wait a minute, Your Honor. What they're trying to say is blah, 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 you know, and what we're saying is blah, 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 blah." So he started playing our attorney and their attorney, and finally, as you know, okay, we'll stop doing it if you know, and that we'll stop showing the play, and then you won't sue us anymore. So it ended up there.
One link between Rafael Buñuel and John Prince, which appears in John Prince's wonderful new book, Johnny, I Hardly Knew You, was crime in New York. And I'd like it if the two of you would share your experiences. There's a great deal in John's book about what happened to him in the short 4 months he was in New York, and he finally left the country and went to Europe. For those of you who read the book, and it's a great book.
No, but John's lying. There was no crime whatsoever in New York. It was the safest place.
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you tell us what you wrote, John? Because
well, I was
fascinating.
I was completely
My wife was reading
a fish out of water. When I arrived there, I was used to reading about crime in the newspaper in Los Angeles, and in New York, you were in the newspaper, and the people would tell me, Rafael would tell me, or Ed would tell me, you have to walk fast, never look up, never look to see how buildings are. When you get to the corner, yes, you got to look both ways, but don't let anybody see that you're looking both ways, and you know, and never have a camera, and blah blah blah, and you have to, and you know, of course.
But tell us what happened to you.
Well, and even having said all that, I think I was an attraction from the very beginning, and I don't know exactly why, but I was okay in the first when I was in your place, I was okay, but then you found me a friend's sublet for about a month or 3 weeks or so, and then a place came available in that terrible rent-controlled, rat-infested building that Bill was staying in. I forget Bill's last name now, but Dalzell staying in, and in fact there were several apartments available there, which was unheard of. And then I remember going to that place, and that was really in many ways was the beginning of the problem. I was hardly moved in when the door was busted down when I was gone. I came back, and things were strewn everywhere, and what little things of value I had had disappeared. I had the typewriter, my underwear and socks were strewn everywhere. And that became a fairly regular event. I think I was probably robbed 2 or 3 times to the point where I didn't even put things away anymore. I just left things on the floor. And finally, the last time, I remember the door was not only kicked down, it was laying on the ground, and there was a little man there dressed in a suit, standing on top of the door, saying, "Oh, I'm the landlord over from New Jersey, and I just came over to see how everything was going." and then he disappeared, and I thought, "Oh my God, what is this all about?" And of course, I was, moving into that place, I was attacked and nearly killed. And
tell us about that. That's a very good part of the book.
Well, it was, not to be racially incorrect here, but I think
it was Puerto Ricans.
Yeah. Well, it's a Puerto Rican neighborhood, and really, people should have stayed out of it, right?
It was right on the place was right next to Con Edison, and the next street over was called Little San Juan. And the Puerto Ricans were there, and I think they watched everything that happened. They kept an eye on everything, and there I was moving from the sublet to the new place, and it was probably 6 or 7 or 8 blocks, and I had to move my things box by box by box, and
It's all in the book.
yeah, and I was getting tired as I went, and I'm sure that they were monitoring everything I did. And when I got to the new place, I had to walk up 5 flights, and near the last, I'm sure it was probably was about the last trip, I heard footsteps behind me coming up on the landing, and the landings were big enough that that I could move over to the edge like this and let someone rush by me. And in that instant, I just sensed something was wrong. And as I turned with my box of dishes and stuff, the lead person's knife went all the way through the box and actually cut my hand on the other side. And there was, I think there was 3 of them. There was at least 2 or maybe 3 of them. But the landing was narrow enough that they couldn't get behind me. And I don't know how long that went on. It's hard to tell when you're in an adrenaline-filled moment like that. But thank God they didn't have a gun, but they were definitely going to get whatever I had. And at some point during this whole ordeal, I began to growl. It was almost a caveman-like experience, and I didn't even know where that was coming from. But and it was a kind of an unearthly sound, and I think that it broke the scene even for them too. And I had dropped the box, and I had a couple of broken dish shards in my hand, and I was actually fighting back. And you don't fight with broken dishes, you don't fight knives unless there's another element involved, and I think that element was this whole adrenaline rush. And after whatever period of time, a minute, 2 minutes, they turned and fled.
And in your case, I mean, New York was out of control then, because I was back and forth there, and I remember just the Port Authority bus terminal was life-threatening. So, but you had a number of experiences, but one particular one that I think finally changed your mind about New York. You fled New York, and then eventually you left too. You had been doing pretty well. You've been doing a lot of interesting things.
Now, what happened with me? Well, just the crime thing is, my apartment was robbed twice. The theater was robbed once, and in the street, my fiancée, the woman I was to marry later, 3 little black kids held us up with a knife and 2 knives and a pistol.
Oh my God!
Yeah, nothing happened, but and they were like 12 years old. Yeah, which they said is the most dangerous at the time. The
Like
drug
they-
addict was dangerous, but the little kids, because it was a game for them. They could find a pistol and bang, 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 bang.
And did they get your money?
They got my money, my watch, anything they wanted. And my wife she's French. So, oh, look, they should be home with their children, with their mother, and they should be in bed. I said, shut up, they killed their mother. Tais-toi in French, I said that. So, that's pretty ugly to be, held up. You don't know what's going to happen.
Baby rattlesnakes.
What's that?
Baby rattlesnakes.
Yeah,
Baby rattlesnakes.
they're more dangerous than
More
the
dangerous.
Yeah, because they don't know what they're
They
doing.
don't know. They don't know how. They don't know when to stop injecting the venom.
But then, a long story short, I don't know, a friend of mine in that building had been held by these 3 kids. One day he's coming back from a party, he sees the kid, he tells the taxi driver, take me to the police station. They come with the police and they arrest the 3 kids. And then there's a court time. He goes there to, either press charges or not, and he's waiting, and this big black guy comes in, like the brother of the kids. We know where you live. I wouldn't, if I were you, I wouldn't press charges. And he didn't press charges, and he told the judge, he said, okay, I'll drop the charges, except I want them once a month to come to my house in the afternoon for a year, and this way they'll get to know me and I get to know them. We'll have coffee and cookies, and okay, and then they didn't show up once. But that was a happy story. Because
But what happened to you then? Did you decide to move?
No, then what happened is all my friends were leaving. Like Treitler went to Massachusetts to his synagogue, and then Charles was in Martha's Vineyard or Maine, and they were all leaving. So here I am by myself. What am I fighting for? You know, like, and I didn't think anybody. So adding that, having no friends and being in a dangerous place, and I decided to go to Mexico City.
Back to where your roots were. You grew up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting about the friendship between the two of you, and I wonder if you could just describe the early part of that when at your fraternity, Kappa Sigma, which we drove by today. It's burned down. There's nothing left of it. How did you feel about that, John? The death of Kappa Sig.
Well, it was kind of.
You knew it was coming.
Yeah, it was apropos in a way. I mean, here you're driving through Westwood, and you see all these new buildings going up, and the university is twice as big as it used to be, and all the fraternity houses that used to be on Fraternity Row seem to be bigger and better and shinier than ever. And then here's this pathetic little corner, because Kappa Sigma was always the outlaw.
On Roebling.
Burned down. I mean, practically only missing was smoke coming out of the embers, and it reminded me of. I guess it was justice, because it was an outlaw place, and even the only reason that they took me as a pledge was because they couldn't find any more pledges, and I was this overweight, inept kid, and they were desperate to take anyone, and I had been on Fraternity Row and Pledge Week, and no one had paid attention to me. When I got to Kappa Sigma, that was just, slap on the back and sign here, and I thought that was really great, and I had no idea that I was coming into a sinking ship.
This is all nicely covered in the book, by the way. Really interesting for those of you from UCLA who are interested in UCLA history, me included. But how did you get from New Mexico to UCLA? I don't mean by bus.
I transferred.
Oh, okay.
I started because the only university that would accept me after high school was New Mexico.
Uh-huh.
So I started there the first 2 years, and then I transferred to UCLA. And then I wasn't too crazy about fraternities. And so when I came here, it was to UCLA, it was a choice of either being in a dorm or staying at the fraternity. The fraternity, I had my own room, and and there was a cook Sunday if you wanted, you could eat there. They had parties, so it was terrific. I didn't complain. Pretty wild, crazy bunch, but you didn't have to do everything.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I really knew you right at the beginning, because because I was part of this obnoxious little pledge class, and I think you were a little bit older. You had your own room and everything, and they were pummeling the pledges, and of course I thought it was great because I was getting paid attention to. It was all bad attention, like they made us. They spread syrup on the kitchen floor, and then they put olives at one end of the floor, and then they made us. We had our clothes off. We had to swim across the floor. This is terrible. This is just typical roughneck stuff that I'm sure still goes on. Then we had to pick up the olive between the cheeks of our buttocks, and then we had to wiggle like a frog to the other end. Then we had to drop the olive into a Coke bottle, and if we missed, we had to eat the olive. And that is so classic.
Yes, it is.
And you went for it so that you could get a secret handshake, and you could find out about the mystic beginnings of Kappa Sigma in Bologna, Italy, which you never cared about to begin with. But at the time I loved it. I mean, I was a complete outcast. I was a complete outcast, and I didn't care. I would eat everybody else's olive. I didn't care,
And in your case, had you been in a fraternity before that, or?
New Mexico.
Oh, you were. Were you in Kappa Sig there too, or?
Yeah, no, you have to be in.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's.
So once you're Kappa Sigma, you're Kappa Sigma for all your life.
For life, yeah.
So when I came to UCLA, I had no problem. I walked in and gave them the secret handshake, whatever it is, and I said, I'd like to stay here. You know, how much does it cost? And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we could do the secret handshake now. And we could confess what the secret words were, and maybe they'd stop sending me their stuff.
Yeah, and you also have your secret finger. Hold it up there.
My little thing.
Yeah. You want to tell us the story of your secret?
No, because it's.
Right, never mind. Okay. Fraternity life, yeah, we all have lived it in our own ways, and it's kind of an adventure. People hate fraternities now, but they did have their amusing side.
Well, they hate them now, but there was yesterday we saw a hell of a lot of fraternities where we were driving.
Yeah.
So I think they were always hated, except because it was a party time. So you know, for example, at New Mexico, I stayed 1 year at the dorm. But you're at the dorm and there's no parties, there's no get-togethers. Then the fraternities had beer buzz that, you know, on the Saturday or Sunday they'd go someplace with a keg of beer and everybody would get as drunk as they could and then drive back, and nobody ever had an accident and died. But you know, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I remember our fraternity was so bad that none of the sororities on campus would come to our little mixer. They'd have to go find junior college sororities or other off-college sororities. They had to bring those girls in there, and sometimes those parties disintegrated to where all those girls had to leave at once. You know, they would drink too much. They would start throwing food around. It was an ill-mannered place. I think we had some sort of a person there that was supposed to be a chaperone or something, but I never saw them.
Yeah, no.
I never saw them.
Your first girlfriend came from Mount St. Mary's.
Right. Yeah, she was.
That's a beautiful little piece.
And she was that was the last place I would have taken her. I mean, I knew that it was strictly an animal house, just like the movie, strictly an animal house.
Yeah. Okay. What happened to that? Actually, the book says that the USC branch of Kappa Sig, which must be a very big fraternity, had a death. Yeah, and the death was.
It was it was in the newspaper. They had a kid swallow a piece of liver on a string, and they didn't pull it up in time, and he suffocated, and you know, so basically Kappa Sigma as a group was already in trouble.
Yeah. Another thing, I heard that about the liver, and then another thing they did in another university, they found out there was a railroad track that hadn't been used for 50 years. So they took one of the rushies, or what they call it, they tied them, you know, like in movies.
No, really?
And the train did pass after 50 years.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
So I heard that and the liver.
Oh.
Yeah.
They made you swallow liver, and then pulling up, it got stuck in the kid's throat and died. So.
Yeah.
Well, and in the end of the fraternity was just
all we did was swallow gold.
Was just classic. You know, I remember they all got drunk. They all got drunk one night like they usually did, and there was somebody named, I think his name was Morris, and he was a big smoker. He was angry because the cigarette machine wouldn't spit out the cigarette, and he kicked it and beat it and beat it. Finally, he called some of the brothers together, and they hauled the cigarette machine out on the street, and they broke it on the curb. Now they got all the cigarettes, the money, and then there was more of them, and then they decided this could be a raison d'etre. And so they headed for Fraternity Row to get all the cigarette machines and all the money. And at some point, whatever number of fraternities they hit, the campus police were there. And you know, and there was some arrests made, blah blah blah. And the next thing you know, as I remember it, the fraternity was off campus, and that's why we had to get an apartment. It wasn't that we necessarily wanted to, and that was the only thing that saved me. I mean, otherwise I would never graduate from college.
You remember where your apartment was?
Yeah, right in front of where the Mormon temple is.
Really?
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I had forgotten that.
Yeah.
And is the Mormon temple still there since Romney lost?
It's huge.
Yeah.
No, you remember it was a huge.
Yeah, I do.
And I saw it Saturday with with my children, we went to the apartment of Eva Batzia. I told you, the professor, the wife of the professor, and she, from her apartment, you can see the back part of the temple. So the temple is still there.
And Eva Barca is very interesting because wasn't he a friend? What was his name? Carlos?
Jose Bacia.
Jose Barcia he was the head of the Spanish department at UCLA,
yeah.
and he was a friend of your father's.
Yeah.
Did that help you get into UCLA? Or
It helped me very much to get into UCLA.
Yeah.
He did a lot. He told me how and this and that.
Yeah.
He helped me a hell of a lot.
And did you take some classes with him too?
No, because I wasn't taking Spanish.
You were fluent in Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah, still are. Okay. So anyway, you're out of there, but why did the two of you end up together?
I don't know. I don't know.
No, well, we developed a friendship,
Uh-huh.
and then we think the same way, and that's the only reason.
Yeah.
Why are we going to share an apartment together if we?
I remember who found the apartment. I don't remember any of the details.
I think we kind of looked for it, and you found it, or I found it, or something. Okay, shall I light up?
Yeah. So what I want to say is that for a year and a half, or however long we were in that apartment, that was the last thing I saw every night before I went to sleep. Was a little light coal coming from you on the other side of the bed, and it got to the point where I don't think I smoked at that point, and I couldn't hardly sleep without that little coal going on. It never would have occurred to me that you might have dropped the cigarette and we might have burned up, Little did I know that all these years would go by, and this is exactly what we'd still be doing, Except now you only do 3 puffs.
What was it that kept your friendship together after all these years? Because Rafael Bowies talked about John, and when the book came out, first of all, I got it. It was a real doorstopper, a great big fat book, and it's about fat people. And I looked at the first 40 pages. I said, I can't read this thing. And then it hooked me as soon as I got into the role of the mother and the way that John captured it. I couldn't stop reading it, and it reminded me of Dreiser from the background from my literary background. Except that it had a wonderful sense of humor, and Dreiser didn't. Sister Carrie, Jenny Gephardt, or whatever it is. Those books are amazing because they're about class difference, moving from poverty into the real world of business and money and so on and so forth. And in a way, your book is like that. But what kept the two of you together as friends?
Because we don't live close to each other.
You write letters back and forth.
Well,
Sometimes
I'm very careful about what time I call. I respect siesta, time to get.
No,
up
but
in
over the
morning.
years also, you remember I had that batch of letters that you.
Right.
You're better. John was a lot better. Like he'd write me a page-and-a-half letter. I would write him a third of a page. He was more prolific in writing.